Good day, beautiful people, and welcome back to Life Treasures and Golden Moments. This is Natalie Silva. Well, it is now the month of February, and we're almost in the middle of it. And then actually today is Valentine's Day, which is my very favorite day of the year. I love Valentine's Day because it's a special day set aside to let people know that we love them. And I don't think it's just about romantic love, but love for everyone. So today I'd like to dedicate my podcast to everyone out there and to share some stories about all kinds of love. I would like to start today with our love for pets. And the first story that I'd like to share with you today is called Heartstrings, and the author is Susan Race. It was once said by Roger Caracas, dogs have given us their absolute all. We are the center of their universe. We are the focus of their love and their faith and their trust. They serve us in the return for scraps. It is without a doubt the best deal man has ever made. People spend their whole lives searching for love. I was no different, until one day I decided to look in the cages at the local pound. And there was love waiting for me. The old dog was considered unadoptable, an underweight Beagle Terrier mix. He had been found running along the road on 3 legs with a hernia, a damaged ear, and BBs embedded in his hind. The people at the Humane Society kept him his allotted 7 days, and then some because he was friendly. And they figured if someone had once spent the money to have his leg amputated, maybe that person would be looking for him. But no one came. I met him on his 10th day. I was dropping off a donation of blankets at the Humane Society and happened to walk by and see him. Looking down through the wire mesh of his cage, I thought he was an appealing little guy, and my heart went out to him. But I really couldn't take another dog home. I already had 4. There has to be a limit, I thought. I can't save them all. Driving away from the Humane Society, I knew the dog would be destroyed if I didn't take him. I felt so helpless. As I passed the church, a sign announcing the week's sermon caught my eye. It was right before Christmas, and it appropriately read, "Is there room at the inn?" I knew at that moment that there was room for one more, especially the one that needed my love. As soon as the Humane Society opened the next morning, their phone rang. "I'm coming for that old beat-up dog. Save him for me," I told them. I couldn't get there fast enough, and from the moment I claimed him, he gave his heart to me completely. In my experience, there is nothing like the feeling of rescuing a dog. Dogs are loving creatures already, but add the element of relief and gratitude, and true devotion flows. It is an immensely satisfying bond that I wouldn't trade for all the puppies in the world. I named the dog Tugs, because he had tugged at my heartstrings, and I did all I could to make his life happy, make it a happy one. In return, Tugs brought new meaning to the term adoration. Wherever I went, he wanted to be there too. He never took his eyes off of me, and with a simple glance in his direction, his whole body waved with happiness. Despite his many handicaps and increasingly failing health, his enthusiasm for life was amazing. There was never an evening I came home that Tugs did not meet me at the door, his eyes sparkling and his tail wagging excitedly. We were together for a little over a year, and constantly during that time, I felt a silent current of love from him, strong, steady, and deep, unceasingly flowing to me. When it was time for the vet to end his suffering, I held his head in my hands, the tears falling on his old muzzle, and watched as he gently fell asleep. Even in my sadness, I was grateful for the gift of his love. For someone who has never had this kind of experience with a pet, there are no words to adequately explain it. But if you have loved an animal in this way, and been loved so fully in return, nothing more needs to be said. Some people will understand that since Tugs has been gone, my fear of death has lessened. If death means finally joining Tugs, then let it happen when it will. In the meantime, I continue my work, rescuing abandoned animals and finding them homes where they can taste love and give such happiness in return. And oftentimes, when I look into the sky and see the soft billowy clouds floating there, I find myself sending a little message. I love you, Tugs. It was once said by Robert Southey, a kitten is the rosebud in the golden garden of the animal kingdom. This is a story about a woman and a kitten, and it's called Lucky to Be Alive. The author is Christine E. Bellers. Maria, a gentle, soft-spoken woman of 70, had always managed to view the world with a child's sense of wonderment. She greeted the dawn of each new day with the brightness of the sun itself and found joy in the smallest things: a dove perch on her bird feeder, the fresh morning dew, and the sweet scent of jasmine in her garden. A widow, Maria lived alone in a run-down neighborhood in Deerfield Beach, Florida. One day, while out tending the small garden in front of her modest home, Maria had been injured in a drive-by shooting. The bullet had pierced through her skin with a ferocious bite and lodged itself in the old woman's right thigh. Crying out in agony, she dropped to the sidewalk. When the mailman found her unconscious nearly an hour later, her injured leg had been bleeding profusely. She'd made it to the hospital just in time, and later, the doctor had told Maria she was lucky to be alive. Returning home, Maria didn't feel so lucky. Before the shooting, the elderly woman had always been grateful that she was healthy for her age. Now just getting the daily mail required Herculean effort. In addition, her medical bills were mounting alarmingly, straining her meager income. And although she had watched the neighborhood deteriorate, somehow things had seemed safe in the daylight. But not anymore. For the first time in her life, Maria felt frightened, alone and vulnerable. I feel defeated, she had told her friend Vera. I'm just an old woman with nothing to do and nowhere to go. When Vera came to pick up Maria for her checkup at the medical center, she hardly recognized her old friend. Maria's soft brown eyes had a haunting sadness, and her face was gaunt and haggard. All the curtains were drawn, and her hands shook with fear as she hobbled out onto the front porch, a cane stabilizing her injured leg. They were a little early for Maria's appointment. So to cheer up Maria, Vera took a longer, more scenic route. They were stopped at a red light when Maria suddenly shrieked, "Look out, that cat! It's trying to run across the street." Vera looked up to see a small black and white cat pounding out into the middle of the traffic. Both women screamed as they saw one car, then another, and finally a third hit the cat. The cat lay motionless, its small body flung into the grass. Cars slowed, but no one stopped to help. "We must save the poor creature," said Maria. Vera pulled over, got out of the car, and went to the hurt animal. Miraculously, it was still alive, but badly injured. "Take my jacket and wrap the kitty in it," said Maria. Vera carefully put the cat on the seat between them. It looked up at Maria and gave her a plaintive, barely audible meow. "Everything will be all right, my little friend," Maria said tearfully. Finding an animal clinic, they went inside and told the receptionist what had happened. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we cannot accept stray animals." It was the same at the next clinic. Finally, at the third clinic, a kind veterinarian, Dr. Susan Shannon, agreed to help and quickly started working on the cat. "This little guy is lucky to be alive," she told Maria and Vera. "If you hadn't been there for him, he never would have made it." The vet took Maria outside. "The cat's injuries are very serious," she said. "He has severe head trauma, crushed paws, and a cracked collarbone. He'll need a lot of expensive medical attention. Today's bill alone will cost at least $400. Maria gasped, but taking her worn cloth wallet out of her handbag, she gave the doctor all the money she had after paying her bills. $50. It's all I have right now, but I promise I will pay you the rest over time. Please don't put the kitty to sleep. She pleaded and pleaded. I'll take him home. We need each other. Sensing how important this was, Dr. Shanagan kneeled and took Maria's hands in hers. You know I could get in trouble with my boss for doing this, she said gently. You see, I really shouldn't have helped the cat in the first place. But don't worry. I will personally pay for this. While the cat was at the clinic, Maria went to check on him every day. She spoke softly to him and gently stroked his chin with her little finger. As the days passed, the cat began to purr, and the sparkle returned to Maria's eyes. The day arrived for the cat to come home. As excited as the little girl on Christmas morning, Maria smiled brightly as she walked into the clinic to pick him up. What have you decided to name your cat? Asked Dr. Shanagan. Cradling the cat in her arms, Maria answered happily, I'm going to call him Lucky, because together we have found a new life. What beautiful stories about pets. We are so blessed to have them in our lives. The next story that I would like to share is a story about friendship. A friend will strengthen you with her prayers, bless you with her love, and encourage you with her heart. This story is called In the Trenches, and the author is Steve Weber. You probably heard the powerful story coming out of World War I of the deep friendship of two soldiers in the trenches. Two buddies were serving together in the mud and misery of the wretched European stalemate. One version even identifies them as actual brothers. Month after month, they lived out their lives in the trenches, in the cold and in the mud, under the fire and under orders. From time to time, one side or the other would rise up out of the trenches, fling their bodies against the opposing line, and sink back in to lick their wounds, bury their dead, and wait to do it all over again. In the process, friendships are forged in the misery. Two soldiers became particularly close. Day after day, night after night, terror after terror, they talked of life, of families, of hopes, of what they would do when and if they returned home from this horror. On one more fruitless charge, Jim fell, severely wounded. His friend Bill made it back to the relatively safety of the trenches. Meanwhile, Jim lay suffering beneath the night flares, between the trenches, alone. The shelling continued. The danger was at its peak. Between the trenches, there was no place to be. Still, Bill wished to reach his friend, to comfort him, to offer what encouragement only friends can offer. The officer in charge refused to let Bill leave the trench. It was simply too dangerous. As he turned his back, however, Bill went over the top, ignoring the smell of condite in the air, the concussion of incoming rounds, and the pounding in his chest. Bill made it to Jim. Some time later, he managed to get Jim back to the safety of the trenches. Too late, his friend was gone. That somewhat self-righteous officer, seeing Jim's body, critically asked Bill if he had been worth the risk. Bill's response was without hesitation. Yes, sir, it was, he said. My friend's last words made it more worth it. He looked up at me and said, I knew you would come. Mother Teresa once said, love has a hem to its garment that reaches the very dust. It sweeps the streets and the lanes, and because it can, it must. The garment of love. This next story that I would like to share, I think I've shared with you before through the years, starting in my 5th year of podcasting. And this is called A Chance Encounter with Destiny, and the author is unknown. Margaret sat beside Jennifer's bed. She wondered what to do to save her mother. Although the surgery was an immediate necessity, but it had to be held up because Margaret's failure to pay the medical bills. She didn't know who to approach for help. Margaret prayed to God. She was so helpless. In the last 26 years of her life, this was the first time that Margaret saw her mother so severely ill. In the small family of 2, she was now the only one left to handle the crisis. She prayed hard for help, but did not have a single ray of hope ahead of her. Never, ever had Margaret felt the dearth of money could be such a curse. In their small family, compromising of Margaret and Jennifer, there was never enough money, but there was always lots of happiness and warmth, enough to sustain the mother and the daughter. Jennifer always used to tell her daughter that more than money, one needs to have a big heart, a very big one that is filled with compassion for all. But oh God, despite having such a big heart, her mother was lying in the hospital bed, and Margaret was not being able to arrange for the necessary funds. Margaret was weeping, holding her mother's hand. Margaret was taken aback when suddenly 2 people came near Jennifer's bed in order to take her to the operating theater. "Excuse me, ma'am. We need to shift her to the operation room immediately," one of the attendants told Margaret, but Margaret had still not been able to pay the bills. Then how come they were taking her mother for the operation? She asked the attendants, who asked her to speak to the person in the reception. Margaret ran to the reception desk. The lady there told her that all her bills were cleared and the surgery could easily be conducted now. When Margaret wanted to know who the one was to clear the bills on her behalf, she was handed over an envelope. Astonished, she opened it and found a letter in the hospital letterhead. It read, "Hi. You need not worry about the medical bills of Mrs. Thompson. Everything has been settled. In fact, she herself had cleared up the bill years back with a glass of warm milk and 2 chocolate cookies. Her surgery is my responsibility, trying my best to make her recover as soon as possible. Regards, Dr. Alfred Edison." The guy who came with homemade pickles. The letter bore a date 20 years back. Margaret stood spellbound. Then she recalled the day of her life, which apparently was insignificant, but had now turned out to be a turning point. That day, 20 years back, little Margaret was playing with her doll and running around the house. The doorbell rang, and she remembered the incident that took place after she opened the door. "Who's there, Margaret?" Jennifer asked from inside her kitchen. "Someone's here selling homemade pickles, Mom." Jennifer came out of her kitchen and found a young boy of around 15 standing with a huge bag in his hand. "Hello, ma'am. I have got some very tasty homemade pickles. Hygienic, lip-smacking, yet reasonably priced. They are made by my mother. Would you like to try some?" said the boy, with a smile on his face. He looked tired and stressed out. He looked as if he had not had a proper meal. Jennifer called him inside and took 2 different types of pickles from him. She asked him to wait and went inside to get the money. She came back with money and a glass of warm milk and 2 cookies. The boy looked surprised. She paid for the pickles and asked him to have the milk and the cookies. The boy smiled again and drank it. He took the cookies in his pocket and thanked her once again before he left. Jennifer liked the pickles a lot and wanted to keep more the next time the boy came. Both the bottles that she bought got over gradually. But the boy never came back. Neither she knew where he lived, nor did he leave any contact information of his with her so she could call him to get some more stuff. Since then, days went by and life went on for both the mother and the daughter. Recently, 2 days back, when Margaret came back from her school, she found that Jennifer was lying senseless in her bed. Margaret called their family physician immediately, who said that Jennifer had to be hospitalized without delay. She had suffered a severe heart attack, and a bypass surgery had to be conducted for Jennifer to get back her to normal life. The letter brought back memories of her mother's kindness and God's grace towards her. Margaret now truly believed how powerful her mother's statement was, that more than money, one needs to have a very big heart. This letter was not just a letter for her, it was a learning experience. For the first time, she learned what it meant to be a friend indeed. These next two stories are about love of family. And the first story I'd like to share is Christmas Day in the Morning. And the author is Pearl S. Buck. He wakes suddenly and completely. It was 4 o'clock, the hour at which his father had always called him to get up and help with the milking. Strange how the habits of his youth clung to him still. 50 years ago, and his father had been dead for 30 years. And yet he waked at 4 o'clock in the morning. He had trained himself to turn over and go to sleep, but this morning, because it was Christmas, he did not try to sleep. He slipped back in time, as he did so easily nowadays. He was 15 years old and still on his father's farm. He loved his father. He had not known it until one day, a few days before Christmas, when he overheard what his father was saying to his mother. "Mary, I hate to call Rob in the mornings. He's growing so fast and he needs his sleep. If you could see how he sleeps when I go in to wake him up, I wish I could manage alone." "Well, you can't, Adam." His mother's voice was brisk. "Besides, he isn't a child anymore. It's time that he take his turn." "Yes," his father said slowly, "but I sure do hate to wake him." When he heard those words, something in him woke. His father loved him. He never thought of it before, taking it for granted, the tie of their blood. Neither his father nor his mother talked about loving their children. They had no time for such things. There was always so much to do on the farm. Now that he knew his father loved him, there would be no more loitering in the mornings and having to be called again. He got up after that, stumbling with sleep, and put on his clothes. His eyes shut, but he got up. And then on the night before Christmas that year, when he was 15, he lay for a few minutes thinking about the next day. They were poor, and most of the excitement was in the turkey they had raised themselves and in the mince pies his mother had made. His sisters sewed presents, and his mother and father always brought something he needed. Not only a warm jacket, maybe, but something more, such as a book. And he saved and bought them each something too. He wished that Christmas he was 15. He had a better present for his father. As usual, he had gone to the 10-cent store and bought a tie. It had seemed nice enough until he lay thinking the night before Christmas. And then he wished that he had heard his father and their mother talking in time for him to save for something better. He lay on his side, his head supported by his elbow, and looked out of his attic window. The stars were bright, much brighter than he'd ever remembered them being, and one was so bright he wondered if it were really the Star of Bethlehem. "Dad," he had once asked when he was a little boy, "what is a stable?" "Oh, it's just a barn," his father had replied, "like ours." Then Jesus had been born in a barn, and to a barn the shepherds and the wise men had come to bring the Christmas gifts? The thought struck him like a silver dagger. Why should he not give his father a special gift too? Out there in the barn, he could get up early, earlier than 4 o'clock, then he could creep in the barn and get all the milking done. He'd do it alone, milk and clean up, and then when his father went in to start the milking, he'd see it all done, and he would know who had done it. At 2:45, he got up and put on his clothes. He crept downstairs, carefully of the creaky boards, and let himself out. The big star hung lower over the barn roof of reddish gold. The cows looked at him, sleepy and surprised. "So, boss," he whispered. They accepted him, and he fetched some hay for each cow and then got to the milking pail and the big milk cans. He had never milked all alone before, but he seemed almost easy to him. He kept thinking about his father's surprise. His father would come in and call him, saying that he would get things started while Rob was getting dressed. He'd go to the barn, open the door, then he'd go in to get the 2 big milk empty cans, but they wouldn't be waiting or empty. They'd be standing in the milk house all filled. The task went more easily than he had ever known. Milking for once was not a chore. It was something else, a gift to his father who loved him. He finished the 2 milk cans. They were full, and he covered them and closed the milk house door, carefully making sure of the latch. He put the stool back in its place by the door and hung up the clean milk pail. Then he went out of the barn and barred the door behind him. Back in his room, he had only a minute to put off his clothes in the darkness and jump into bed. He heard his father up. He put the covers over his head to silence his quick breathing, and the door opened. "Rob," his father called. "We have to get up, son, even if it is Christmas." "Oh, all right," he said sleepily. "I'll go on out," his father said. "I'll get things started." The door closed, and he lay still, laughing to himself. In just minutes, his father would know his dancing heart was ready to jump from his body. The minutes were endless, 10, 15. He did not know how many, and he heard his father's steps again. The door opened, and he lay still. "Rob?" "Yes, Dad." His father was laughing, a queer, sobbing sort of laugh. "Thought you fooled me, did you?" His father was standing beside him, pulling away the cover. "It's for Christmas, Dad." He found his father and clutched him in a great big hug. He felt his father's arms go around him. It was dark, and they could not see each other's faces. "Son, I thank you. Nobody ever did a nicer thing. Oh, Dad, I want you to know. I do want to be good." The words broke from him of their own will. He did not know what to say. His heart was bursting with love. "Well, I reckon I can go back to bed and sleep," his father said after a moment. "No, hark, the little ones are waked up." "Come to think of it, son, I've never seen you children when you first saw the Christmas tree. I was always in the barn. Come on." Rob got up and pulled on his clothes again, and they went down to the Christmas tree, and soon the sun was creeping up where the star had been. Oh, what a Christmas! And how his heart had nearly burst again with shyness and pride as his father told his mother and made the younger children listen about how he, Rob, had gotten up all by himself. "The best Christmas gift I ever had, and I'll remember it, son, every year on Christmas morning so long as I live." They both remembered it, and now that his father was dead, he remembered it alone. That blessed Christmas dawn, when alone with the cows in the barn, he had made his first gift of true love. This next story about family is called Reflections, and the author is Charles R. Swindoll. It happened again last night, as one by one the rest of the family drifted off to bed. I put a couple more logs on the fire, slid into my favorite chair, and read for well over an hour. I came across a few thoughts put together by Ed Dayton, a longtime leader in the World Vision Ministry. His words sent me back many, many years when he mentioned watching a short film called The Giving Tree, a simple, fanciful piece about a tree that loved a boy. When the boy was young, he swung from the tree branches, climbed all over her, ate her apples, slept in her shade. Such happy, carefree days. The tree loved those years. But as the boy grew, he spent less and less time with the tree. "Come on, let's play," invited the tree on one occasion. But the young man was interested only in money. "Take my apples and sell them," said the tree. He did, and the tree was happy. He didn't return for a long time, but the tree smiled when he passed one day. "Come on, let's play." But the man was older and tired of his world. He wanted to get away from it all. "Cut me down. Take my large trunk and make yourself a boat. Then you can sail away," said the tree. The man did, and the tree was happy. Many seasons passed, summers and winters, windy days and lonely nights, and the tree waited. Finally, the old man returned, too old and too tired to play, to pursue riches, or to sail the seas. "I have a pretty good stump left, my friend. Why don't you just sit down here and rest?" said the tree. He did, and the tree was happy. I stared into the fire, watching my life pass in review as I grew older. With the tree and the boy, I identified with both, and it hurt. How many giving trees have there been in my life? How many have released part of themselves so I might grow, accomplish my goals, find wholeness and satisfaction? So many. Thank you, Lord, for each one. Their names could fill this page. The fire died into glowing embers. It was late as I crawled into bed. I had wept, but now I was smiling. "Good night, Lord," I said. I was a thankful man, thankful I had taken time to reflect. The next two stories that I would like to share with you today are love of couples. And the first story is called Remember Africa, and it's about eternal love. The author is Jo Beth McDaniel. Where the heart that doeth not keep with its innermost core some fond remembrances hidden deep of days that are no more. By Ellen Hotworth. "Who are you?" Frank demanded when Ruth walked into the room. She sighed and eased gently down on the bed next to him, folding his age-shrunken hands in hers. He recoiled from her, uncertainty, fear widening in his eyes. "I'm Ruth, your wife," she said, forcing a polite smile and patting his hand. His eyebrows shot upward as he bolted upright in bed. "Wife? We've been married 40 years, Frank." "No!" Frank shook his head vigorously. "No, I don't remember you." Ruth nodded and closed her eyes. It was a conversation they had nearly every day during the past few months. The illness had not much weakened Frank's body, but his mind faded day to day, like color from oft-washcloths. "That's okay, dear," Ruth answered. "I love you whether you know me or not." She adjusted the pillow between his back and the wooden headboard, then straightened the covers around his waist. "Oh, Frank, we've had so many wonderful years. We sure had a good life together." He smiled back at her tentatively, eyes still clouded in confusion. "Was I a good husband?" She chuckled. "You devil," she said, pinching his cheek softly. "The best. You were always kind and gentle and lots of fun. Even now you try, don't you?" He nodded. Her words seemed to reassure him. He looked around the room as if he desperately searching for clues. "Our family?" Ruth hesitated. "Well, we never had children, Frank. We tried, but we couldn't. We have so many friends and loved ones. You've lived 82 good long years now. People have always loved you. Frank, you've touched so many lives." He nodded. But his eyes kept that faraway gaze, unable to connect with any familiar faces. "Well, what did we do?" "Well, mister, we worked. We worked hard, and we built up your family business, and we went to church, and we enjoyed ourselves just fine, and we traveled all over the world." "Oh," his eyes danced just a flicker of light. "Where?" "Everywhere, Frank. We went to so many beautiful places. Do you remember Edinburgh, Frank? The castles in the countryside of Scotland? You loved how green it was, even when we were freezing. And you wore these silly plaid caps that made me laugh." She searched his eyes, but the light had passed. Frank slipped back down on the pillow and stared at the ceiling. His profile was nearly the same as her first sight of him 40 years earlier, as he stood in her doorway, coming to pick her up for a ride to church camp. When she opened the door, his eyes had grown wide with interest, and he gave her that devilish grin she'd come to love so much. Now his mouth was drawn tight and grim with irritation. And Japan, remember Tokyo, Frank? Remember the lights and the crowded streets and the temples? How you brought all those tiny mechanical toys and the radio as small as your fingernail? She held up his hand to show him, but his eyes were squeezed tight, his mind fruitlessly searching for his memories. He shook his head, a frown deepening in his face. A moment passed. He blinked and stared at her again, at the face he had awakened to every morning for 4 decades. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice edged with fear. She drew a long, steady breath, looking into his bewildered eyes. "Africa, Frank," she said slowly. She took his hand back, gripping it tightly. "Do you remember our travels through Africa?" "Africa," he repeated quietly. "We saw animals," she ventured softly. "Lions," he answered. She sat silently waiting. "We saw lions," he said, pulling himself slowly beside her. "We sat in the Land Rover, and the lions were surrounding us, coming right up to us. And there were elephants, and a huge one with a huge tusk that came crashing out of the bush right at us." Ruth nodded and smiled back at him. "You were there with me. You were sitting next to me." His eyes were clearing, shining. She could feel the tears begin to well in her own. "And flamingos," he said, his voice rising. "We stood at the edge of the lake and watched them fly. There were so many of them. It was just like a pink cloud rising up from the water." His words slowed and his eyes closed. "Frank," she said, and he sat still, not moving, not answering. "Frank, remember the night in Iguana when the children sang to us? We were in the little village near the river." "The children, yes," he said, opening his eyes again. "They were so sweet and so young, and their round little faces all lit up. They were all holding candles, and afterward we ate in that man's home with a dirt floor. We sat in the candlelight, and they brought us the food in those huge black bowls. Remember how strange the food looked?" Frank laughed and groaned. "We didn't know if it was raw or worms or what, and we were with the missionaries." She nodded. "Yes, we were visiting missionaries. We had a church in the village." Yes, he said. "I can see them now. And the missionary told us how he prayed before he ate. He prayed, 'Lord, I'll put it down if you can keep it down.'" As they laughed, she took in every detail: the blueness of his eyes, the curve of his cheekbones, the wrinkles surrounding his smile. Then Frank looked toward the window, where sunlight streamed in through the crack in the curtains. "Ruth," he asked worriedly, "why am I in bed so late this morning?" "You're not well today, Frank." "I'm feeling a little tired," he said, yawning. He slid back down to his pillow, smiling dreamily up at her. "Ruth, what were those waterfalls?" "Victoria Falls." "Yes, Victoria Falls, Ruth. I remember staying there, feeling the spray from the falls, and you were scared and holding on to my arm so tight, and you said it was the most beautiful sight you'd ever seen. And I told you, no, you were still more beautiful to me." He curled up and kissed her softly on the cheek. She was shaking, holding as tight to his arm as she had at the edge of the falls. "And you were still so beautiful." "You were something else, mister," she laughed. "I love you, Ruth, and I love you, Frank." His eyes were blinking and fading. "Why don't you dream about those waterfalls?" Ruth said. "I'll be right there." With that, he gave a sigh and relaxed, his sparse gray hair flattening against the pillow. Ruth pulled the covers up around his chest and kissed him, listening to the rise and the fall of his breathing. His mind was drifting back into the fog, away from her and the world that they had shared. When he woke, he would again recoil from her, and she knew the sight of his face and the warmth of his skin were a gift. A brief glimpse too soon, lost to memory. Someday, even the vast continent would not have the power to bring him back to her. This second story about loving couples is called The Loving Compliment, and it was written by Leo Buscaglia. The applause of a single human being is of great consequence. Nearly every one of us is starving to be appreciated, to be the recipient of the most supreme compliment that we are loved. We need others to recognize our strengths, or sometimes just to prop us up in the places where we tend to lean a little. Honest compliments are simple and cost nothing to give, but we must not underestimate their worth. Mark Twain once said he could go for 2 months on a good compliment. The most loving compliment I've ever heard of was given by Joseph Choate, former ambassador to Great Britain. When he was asked who he would like to be if he could come back to this earth again after he died, he replied without an instant's hesitation, Mrs. Coates' second husband. Now that's a compliment to his wife if there ever was one. My final story for today is called The Flower of Friendship. The author is unknown, and I think I might have told this story before through the years, but I thought it would be a perfect one to close with, about sharing love and letting people know that they're cared for and loved. The Flower of Friendship. The lush green garden was inviting and peaceful. Mary chose to sit on the bench beneath the old willow tree. She was so stressed out with the mundane problems of her life. She just wanted to retire from everything, from everywhere. Her frowns were clear enough to express her disgust. She sat there for hours till her silence was broken by the voice of a young boy. "Hey, look what I found." The boy looked untidy, as if he had come running from play. He was sitting beside her. Mary was simply not interested in him and did not respond. "I got this for you. Isn't it beautiful? Would you be my friend?" the boy asked her with a big smile. Mary was so surprised to see this teenager wanting to befriend an aged lady. She did not say anything and kept looking at him. The boy was holding a dry flower in his hand. Mary was a bit annoyed at his gesture, but she kept quiet. The boy took the flower near his nose, trying to smell it deeper. "It smells wonderful. I'm sure it's going to make your day," he said happily. Mary did not know how to retreat. She thought that the boy was crazy. Otherwise, he would never insist on giving her a dry flower and then smell it and compliment it so much. As it is, Mary was disgusted with her own problems. The weird attitude of the boy irked her even more, all the more. The boy was undaunted. "Please accept it. It's for you only," he said. Mary thought the best way to get rid of this new unwanted problem was to take the flower so the boy would go away. As she took out her hand to take the flower from him, she saw that instead of holding the flower near her hand, he was holding it in the air. Mary was shocked to discover that the boy could not see. He was blind. She was taken aback. She opened her mouth for the first time and said, "Thank you so much." The boy smiled and went away. She was still wondering how the blind boy could see her problem. How could he know that this dry flower would make her day? Then she realized that all the problems she was tired of did not belong to the world. The problems were of her own self. She had to change her way of seeing things. Her new friend, who could not see, showed her that happiness can lie even in a dry and dead flower, if the heart of the viewer is evergreen. Mary took the dry flower in her hand and decided to make a fresh start with her life. She promised herself that she would see everything in a positive way. As she was about to leave the garden, she found the blind boy holding another flower and sitting on a bench talking to a man who was sitting with his head bent, tired and lost. She believed that this man would also rejuvenate after he got the friendship flower from the boy, just the way that she did. Oh, another beautiful story. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed all these stories today. And I hope you had a wonderful, happy Valentine's Day. And I'm sending you my love through my podcast. And I want to thank you for coming and joining me today and for listening. And so my final thoughts are reach out in love to everyone. Share who you are and your beautiful gifts to each other. And share your love. Until next time, this is Natalie Silver with Life Treasures and Golden Moments. Take care and may God bless.